Hello there, it's me, George Agnew again with my dog Bolly, and we're going to go on another walk around the Rougham estate. As usual, we're starting at the Blackthorpe barn, and today our walk is going to be going to look at some of the Roman remains in Rougham, of which we've got quite a lot. And they fit really rather nicely into the walks, and we'll be walking down a Roman road. So that's all going to be quite interesting, I think. And there's lots else to see, so even if you're not passionate about Roman history and that sort of thing, I think this walk would be really rather fun for everybody. So let's enjoy it. Off we go. This is the start of the walk, and we're heading off from the Blackthorpe barn down the usual pathway which we tend to take for most of these, and we're heading off towards the car park and through that and off in a right-handed direction towards the Downs Wood. Today's walk is quite long. I haven't actually checked my measurements, but I think it's something like an hour and a half. It's not the longest of the walks, but it's still it's quite an ambitious one, and it does involve a couple of stiles. So please be aware of that, and you'll see me go over the stiles later on as the walk carries on. Seems we've got a tractor coming down here, so we'll keep over to the side to let it go past. We're doing some road repair work today because we've got a lot of potholes. We have a lot of potholes which we're repairing in and around the barn. It's interesting, one normally moans about potholes and the council haven't repaired them. Suddenly it's our responsibility, and it's the same issue, and this time it's up to us to sort them out. So that's what we're trying to do today. The blackthorn is still flowering, which is lovely to see. I think it's coming towards the end of its season now, and we'll be going past a blackthorn tree in a moment where you can see both flowers and leaves, which is usually a sign that the flowers are about to finish. Coming up to the edge of the Downs Wood here, and we just go about 20 yards along here before turning into the wood. Here is the blackthorn with some flowers and some leaves, as you can see. It's still a very, very lovely sight, and the ground is all covered in blossom, which is really, really pretty too. And there's little bits of blossom floating around in the air. Years ago, my partner and I went to Japan at the cherry blossom time of year, and when I see blossom floating down, it always makes me think back to those days of walking along the roads in Tokyo and in other Japanese cities, which were all full of blossom. The random daffodils that have been growing in the wood here, the Downs Wood here, and are coming increasingly into flower now. There's a lot of rain yesterday again. We've had so much rain over the last few months, these paths are all really rather wet. It's a testament to how sandy the land is this part of the village that this path is really quite walkable, even though there are some bits of mud on the surface. Passing all the usual landmarks here, the lovely old lime tree, the oak tree on the other side with the great scar on the side, the so-called fairy door, which, as we all know, is just an old wound which I wonder might have been caused during the war by the American Air Force who were here. I can imagine perhaps somebody drove a jeep or something into the side of the tree and taken the bark off, and it's been trying to recover ever since. Something like that. And we carry on a little bit slippery here, and then round to the left, and we follow the path through the Downs Wood. This is the main path running east-west through the Downs Wood, and it's so popular that it's very, very clear where to walk here, because it's absolutely standing out against the undergrowth, so there really is no issue about which way to go. Again, various little bits of slithery mud on the surface, which have to be a little bit careful to not slip, but it's not deep mud. I'm wearing Wellington boots as usual because I have enough experience on these walks of mud. And there was one the other week where we actually went through a completely unexpected flood, which was quite a few inches deep. And I was extremely glad to be wearing Wellington boots that day. I should really have known that it was there, but somehow I had failed to pick up on that one. Birch trees still standing out in the winter against the dark bark of the Scots pines. We're now in this sort of transitional phase between winter and spring, and you get these days where it really feels spring-like and lovely, and you can hear bird song and that sort of thing. I mean, I can hear some bird song now, and today is, I think, a little bit on the transitional spectrum between winter and spring. Yesterday it rained really hard, and I don't think it would have been much fun doing this walk yesterday, and it felt probably rather more wintry as a result. We have a bit of wind at the moment, which is blowing in the tops of the trees. Maybe you can see them blowing around a little bit, which creates some atmosphere, I think. Wind is quite an exciting thing. Can get too scary, of course, if it gets overdone. Not very long ago, this oak tree on the right blew down. It's a tree that's been dead for a long while, but you can see, interestingly, you can see the trunk and how it goes into the ground. And this is called the root plate. And obviously when the tree has rotten, the root plate gradually rots, and so in the end there's really nothing to hold the tree up, and so it falls over. Fortunately, it's fallen away from the path. We're going to be able to leave that where it is to quietly rot into the landscape. It's incredible how the bramble seems to hang on to their leaves through the winter, but you can begin to see there's new growth. You can see that there's new growth now coming on the bramble branches there. I can see it now. So that is the sign of spring, and before long we're going to be worrying about the brambles coming across the path and getting in people's way. But at the moment that's still into the future. Some people in wheelchairs are keen to do some of these walks, and so I am trying to keep my eyes on the walk in a new way to see how realistic it is to come along them on a wheelchair. I'm afraid the walk today involves stiles, which really completely rules it out. But there are sections of the walk, like this piece through the Downs Wood, which are doable with a wheelchair. And there's a much smaller walk which goes round the Downs Wood and back, which is, I think, quite doable for a wheelchair. And there will be a few more, and I will try to point them out soon so that people who would like to do that will be able to know where they can go. Today we're turning right and heading out of the Downs Wood as we turn in a southerly direction. And feel the wind more as we get out of the shelter of the wood. It's quite a mild day, even though it's windy. And Wally doesn't have his coat on today, which I hope I'm not going to regret. I think it's going to be fine. We're walking along this field edge again, which we do for so many of these walks, which is the starting point to get to so many different parts on the estate. There's still water running in the ditch, and there are a lot of yellow flowers growing along the water's edge. I wonder how many thousands of gallons of water flowing off the fields around here at the moment. It's an enormous amount, and for such a dry part of the country normally, it's really very, very surprising for us to actually experience this. But I have to say I'm still rather relishing it, though it's creating problems for the farm. Getting onto the land is quite tricky, because when the fields are wet, the weight of a tractor driving around on the soil compacts the soil. It squashes it harder and tighter and flatter, making it much more difficult for plants to grow, for our crops to grow in the field. And it can do damage to the soil structure, which soil structure is a lot of it actually is air gaps. And if you squash the soil down flat, you're flattening the air gaps and making the soil very unusable, really, as a growing medium. It will eventually recover, but it's not a good thing to do. We have very wide tyres which we can put onto tractors, called flotation tyres, and we put them on when the conditions are wet like this. It makes the tractors very, very wide going down the road, which is not exactly very popular with members of the public, because it can take up, on a narrow road, it can take up the entire width of the road. So it's not something we make a habit of doing. However, if you do see a tractor with very, very wide tyres going along at the moment, that is almost certainly the explanation. We're coming out to the corner where we're going to be turning left. We're just having a look at this gorgeous, gorgeous oak tree. Fabulous, fabulous thing. Seen it many times on these walks, but it never gets less beautiful. There's the water flowing through the bridge, under the bridge. And now we're heading left as we take our route up towards Rougham Church, which again we've done on many walks. The crop in the field here is rape. It's the stuff with the yellow flowers, which is used to make oil. It produces enormous quantities of pollen, which is very, very popular with bees. So our beekeeper, Zach, who looks after the bees around here, is quite keen on rape. And we have more of it here on the right. This is an example of what's called blocking, where you grow the same crop in several fields next door to each other so that you can look after them all together. I can actually see a rape flower. I don't think you can probably pick that up, but there is one flower of rape actually growing in there. And it is an extraordinary thing how they suddenly rise up out of the plants. These plants were planted last August and have been growing ever since. And they develop this sort of bushy quality. And then suddenly, almost overnight, they all produce stems with yellow flowers on, and the whole landscape transforms into this world of yellow. There are people who have hay fever who are affected by the rape flowers, and I apologise to them for growing the crop, I suppose, but the nature of life is that as farmers we have to grow food. We have to grow food for people, and rape oil is an important commodity. Rape is also a break crop. That basically means it's a crop which you can plant in between growing crops of, say, wheat or barley or rye, which are probably the classic main crops. Wheat is the main crop here, as in most East Anglian farms. We grow a lot of rye, which is slightly unusual, and barley, which is largely made into beer or used for animal feed. But you can't grow that every year. You have to have a pause in that when you grow something else, because you get pests and diseases which grow in the soil associated with the crop, and you need a year in which you're not doing it to actually get them to reduce in numbers or to disappear. So you need to grow something which is a entirely different sort of plant to the grasses, which is, what basically wheat and barley and rye are all types of grass. And it's going to be something which is not a grass. And so this is I think it's a member of the cabbage family. It certainly smells like it. I think I can see possibly another flower up here, or maybe it's a daffodil. I suspect it's a daffodil, it's on the edge. But it will not be long at all before the more advanced fields here will be a sea of yellow. Getting closer to the church now and the school. Yes, that was a daffodil. So sorry for misleading you there, but the other thing definitely was a rape flower. Bolly has found something interesting to smell. You can probably hear the children in the playground. Having a wonderful time, I hope. We're going to pick our way through between the cars and keep the camera averted from the school. There's some potholes here too. I'm afraid the car park here is always notorious for potholes. We have had an effort recently to fill some of them up. And I think it is a lot less bad than it used to be. But there must still be a couple of hundred potholes here. On our left front is the spinney, which we've seen on previous walks, we're going to actually walk down there on one of the walks when we visit the church. And there is the Lime Avenue. Now we are turning right, crossing the public road with care, and negotiating the gate. Which we'll leave open for Noel, who is flying the drone each day. He's doing a brilliant job. And we're making our way up between these yew trees towards the church. Rougham Church Tower is visible from a long way off. You can see it from the A14 as you come out of Bury, heading towards Rougham in the distance. It's a real landmark. Turning west, and now we're heading out through the churchyard. It's a strange thing walking through a churchyard. When you get a little bit older, you know quite a lot of the people who are here. And so it's like visiting old friends. It's a strange, quite intimate experience, and rather special. Here we have the Rougham Harvest Fair gate, which we've seen several times. There's the initials and the date, 1981. And here we go, on we go, along the narrow path here between the school, their security fence, and our hedge. At the far end here there is a kissing gate, which is one of the things which would make this walk, frankly, pretty impossible for somebody in a wheelchair. In fact, I can see that somebody has damaged the gate It's got broken since I was last here, in fact. That will need to be repaired. But I still think a wheelchair would find it very difficult getting through that. I think this is a rape flower here. Talking about how it is emerging now. So we can see one close to on a rather disastrous bit of crop. But it's an opportunity to actually look at the flower. And now we're heading along this little pathway, which is quite muddy. Boots are definitely a good plan along here, and they're going to be a good plan for several sections of this walk. Here we can see the water in the ditch flowing along from ditch in one direction, ditch in another direction, and then we look underneath the culvert, we can see where all of it, if I can pick it up here, I can't actually see it, but I'm sure it's there. There is the water flowing through from the other to the other side. The camera that I'm holding today is a thing on a gimbal, which means that it's slightly absorbing the shock of my walking and evens out the image. But one of the aspects to it as well is that it slowly adjusts as I move round, and sometimes I can't quite see where it's pointing. As I'm trying to photograph something, it's still slowly adjusting itself round to that angle, and sometimes I think I'm filming something that I'm not. So you'll have to forgive me if occasionally I'm describing things that are not actually visible on the film. I'm not a professional cameraman by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just trying to give you an amateur's impression of our lovely landscape around here. Here's the pond, which looks very full, which is lovely to see, which we restored a number of years ago, and it's doing really well these days. It holds water for a lot of the year, providing drinking water for animals, birds, insects in summer, source of mud for swallows and swifts and house martins to make their nests. Wally has again found something to smell. Give him a little moment to have a little sniff, and then I suppose I'll have to get him to come along, because otherwise we'll spend too long doing that. Somebody coming the other way. Morning. Yeah, not too bad, thank you. gorgeous oak tree. We're approaching the hedge line at the end here, which runs across our front, and today we're going to be turning left to take a path further south on the estate. And our destination at the far end is a place called Eastlowhill, which is the centre of all the Roman bits and pieces in Rougham. So we're going to be having a little bit of a look, swinging around to the left now and crossing over the little footbridge and carrying on along this footpath with the hedge on our right now. Because of the nature of the wind, this hedge is actually providing some very nice shelter, which is lovely. Makes you feel quite cosy as you walk along. Doesn't shut the wind out completely, but it slows it down and filters it. The crop in the field here on our left, I think it's a field of wheat, which will have been winter wheat, which will have been drilled in the autumn and is sitting in a very wet field. So nobody wants to go onto a field like that at the moment and upset what's happening. We just leave it alone. Put some fertiliser on when we can, but we have to do it with great care at the moment. It's the hulk of an ancient oak tree which fell down a long time ago and is now covered in brambles. I think we've seen this before, but that red colour on the timber is really striking. Going under the pylons. 2 rows of pylons go across the estate here at Rougham. The first ones we meet, and Bolly thought we might be going to the right then, where there is another footpath, but no, today we go straight on. And if you look at the wet along the side of the field here, you can get a real sense of how nearly waterlogged this whole field is. Tractors create little roadways as they go around the field, which are called tram lines, so that they try to always use the same routes and not damage the crop all over. And the tram lines are definitely holding more water. That's evident from over here. And now on the right front we have the Rougham playing field, which is a centre of local activities. I think that I see a car over there, so there's somebody about, but it's pretty quiet here today. Carrying on our southerly route as we head for another little bridge followed by a stile, which is one of the main reasons why this route is completely impassable to people on wheelchairs, I'm afraid. Sorry about that. Approaching the little footbridge now. Which Bolly is now crossing. So he knows just where we're going. And it's really quite a long way down to the water down there. A couple of metres anyway. And we have quite a little step. We have a couple of quite big steps come off the bridge. Other side, Bolly. And then we have to negotiate the stile. So Bolly has to go through on the left. Yes, you're going to go through here, Bolly. Through that. That's the way through. So that's how you get Bolly through. And then I get the lead through. Hang on to the lead, Bolly on the other side, and then I climb over. There, I think we did that quite well. And then off we go again. We're now in a meadow where there can be cattle, hence the stiles. Stiles are usually a sign that you're entering or leaving an area with livestock. So they're a bit of a warning that livestock may be around. And this area is quite wet. You wouldn't want to drive a tractor across here at the moment. It's very, very flooded. The ditch on the right is not, I mean, you can hardly call it a ditch really, it's a slight sort of scrape which is carrying water at the moment, and normally it would really be, there really wouldn't be anything to see there at all. There's Bolly having yet another sniff. Come on Bolly, we've got to keep going. Got quite a walk to do. And ahead of us is the drinking trough on the right, which is a sign that this is a field that have cattle normally. In the winter you don't have cattle out on the grass too much because the grass isn't growing, and often they can damage the grass, particularly when it's wet like this. There's the trough. And then as you get into spring, the animals emerge again from their winter quarters. In the winter they tend to live in buildings, not exclusively, but largely. And they emerge again when the spring comes along, which we're shortly going to have. Right, Bolly, we're going to go through this one there, see if we can do it nicely. Bolly has gone through a gap that wasn't intended. So this is going to be a little bit trickier, but I'm sure we'll manage it. I just have to get the lead over the top like that. I'll then come round onto the stile and holding on to the handrail of my left hand, also holding the camera, so things are all waving around a bit. Now we're on the bridge. Yet more water flowing underneath there. And we're coming up to the public road, Moat Lane, before we go into Oak Lane. There was no traffic on Moat Lane. And now we're on Oak Lane. Oak Lane is a public right-of-way and access to a number of people's houses. But it's pretty quiet, so it's a nice enough spot to walk. Just a few potholes along here too. I'm rather conscious of them at the moment. The path ends off to the left shortly, and we will be following that along for something like another 100 yards or so before doing a right turn. We haven't reached Eastlowhill yet, which is the destination for this walk, where I can begin to tell you about the Roman history of Rougham. So we'll keep talking about wildlife and things till we get there. So I'm doing a little slightly left turn and then a slightly right turn here. And I can see over to the right the hedge line which will be carrying the footpath that we'll be walking along in a minute. When we get to this path, we shall be turning right, which is in a westerly direction, and we're getting almost to the most southerly spot on the estate that we visit on this walk. We'll be working our way westerly towards Eastlowhill. The footpath goes off to the left here, but we're not taking that. Instead of which, no, Bolly, we're going this way. We're going to go right down the footpath here, which means you're passing, I can't see a sign here, which is slightly unfortunate, but we'll be passing with the hedge on our right. That's the way to know which way to go. And now we're walking along this hedge line. The shelter which we had before from the hedge is now gone because we're walking straight into the wind coming in from the west, which is quite bracing. This walk involves the section on the public road, which we are now approaching. Public road here is really very quiet, and I don't feel too concerned about it. To encourage people to walk along it, you must, of course, take care, and you must keep your dog on a lead and on short lead along this section, which will take a few minutes to walk. You know, I'd prefer you to have your dog on the lead all the time, in the way that I do with Bolly. For him, seeing the lead is actually the sign that we're going on a wonderful walk. He associates the lead with the walk. We're about to pass a small piece of woodland on the right here, which used to be a field called Drummers, and it now has been planted up with American black walnut trees, which are, as a deciduous tree, are not showing any leaves at all at the moment. They produce a very lovely autumn colour, and their timber is really desirable. They were planted as a commercial crop on basically on a field taken out of farmland. So one has to remember that forestry is not all about prettiness and the environment. It's also about trying to make a bit of money to pay for it all from now and again. And that's what this is all about here on the right. I don't expect I shall be around long enough to see those trees harvested, but we'll find out. Somebody will find out how that went in due course. And it's created a nice little piece of woodland here. You can see it again. What you may notice is that it completely lacks an understory, which is a problem with newly planted bits of woodland, unless they're planted in conjunction with the understory, in other words, hazel and those sort of bushy, smaller trees. Now we're coming to public road here, and having said how quiet it is, here is a car absolutely immediately going round. We're going round quite quietly. We're going to go straight on here, so you get a very clear view of the traffic as you enter this thing. And we'll be walking on the right-hand side of the road. Remember to keep Bolly on a short lead here. And temptation is to let it go out longer. There's now a car coming the other way. This area of Rougham is called Rougham Green, and on our right, hidden in amongst the trees, is a house called the Chantry. The Chantry used to be the rectory here in the village, and where the vicar would have lived. But it's a very, very grand house, and I think it was probably the 1930s the Church of England sold it off and built a new rectory near the church. And so the Chantry is one of the smartest houses in the village. And it's called Chantry because in the Middle Ages, before the Reformation, people would have paid money to have people sing and pray for the souls of the dead. And they would do that from a place called a chantry. From the word comes from the French chanter, to sing. And so there would have been a whole load of singing going on there for the richer members of the community and their predecessors. But that's long, long ago. Now we push on along here. Going west all the time, getting closer to Eastlowhill, where our Roman story will begin. Perhaps I could tell you a little bit about it as we walk along this road, because there's perhaps less commentary on wildlife and things to say at the moment. So Eastlowhill is the location of a series of Roman burial mounds, and there is the site of a Roman villa, and a Roman road ran close by these two things, very close to the burial mounds, and was a route which ran from Chelmsford down towards London in Essex up to Ixworth, which was quite an important Roman fort, and was a crossroads of a whole series of roads, one of which then became Peddars Way, which leads up to the Wash, where people would then take a ferry across to Lincolnshire. I'm just going to pause and let... No, the person's standing in. There are some monumental potholes here, which I'm glad I'm not responsible for. If you come along here, do watch out for them. But this Roman road was really quite an important route in Roman times. And I can see another flood. I can see another flood here. It's nothing like as big as the previous one, but it's still going to be potentially a little bit deep. We'll find out shortly. See whether Bolly is willing to walk through it, or if I have to carry him. Right, Bolly, what are we going to do? You're going to be all right here? I think this is going to be fine. It's not that bad. This Bolly's quite happy going through here. Good. Disaster averted. So we have this Roman road system coming along past here, and there's a man called, I think his name is Ivan Margary, or Margary, who has written a book on all the Roman roads of Britain. And in this he categorises them. And the shorter the numbers, rather like modern roads, the A1 is a very important road, whereas the A, I don't know, 1111, for example, would be a much smaller road. The road number he gives to the one here that goes through Rougham is the 33A, which indicates that it's actually quite an important one. Not the most important in the country or anything like that, but really quite a significant road that would have carried a lot of people on important journeys up and down the country, would have carried troops heading for the fort at Ixworth, and merchants, scholars, all sorts of people travelling around the country would have come past Rougham and come past the burial mounds at Eastlowhill. The Romans liked to bury their dead conspicuously if they were wealthy people, and what they liked to do was to have their tombs along the roadside so people could actually see them as they went past, to think about them, remember them maybe, and see how wealthy the family was and the sort of tomb that they constructed. Here comes a vehicle. Let's let it through. Bolly on very short lead. And we head on. Near Rome, there's a road called the Appian Way, which still exists, which is lined with huge tombs of very, very important Roman figures. And that is a sort of an extreme example of what the Romans like to do. Here in Rougham, of course, it's tiny by comparison, but it would still have been the site of the burials of important figures in the local area. And there's comes another car. And these figures it's been suggested, for example, that the villa here, which we will not be visiting, and it is awaiting excavation, and I'm not going to be too specific about its location. The villa might very well have been granted to a senior military figure in the Roman army after the revolt of Boudicca, which happened about 20 or 30 years after the Romans invaded country. I think in something like, and I'm making this up a little bit, I think it might be 81 AD. Please check the date, and I'm very willing to be proved wrong on that, but it's something like that. After that period, this part of the country was really occupied quite heavily by Roman troops. One of the reasons for the roads is to actually move troops around, and the fort at Ixworth was probably also there to actually provide a military force that could be sent to a trouble spot as quickly as possible. And with a number of roads leading out from it, the troops could be sent off in any required direction quickly with a decent road to walk along to get there. And so I suspect that the history of the villa here and eventually these tombs may indirectly relate back to the Boudicca uprising and to the clampdown which happened afterwards. What used to happen when a senior Roman officer retired was that they often were granted some land in the area where they retired, where they could put down roots, quite literally, and they build themselves a villa. Maybe the villa was built for them, I don't know. But a place where they could then have a farm and live out their remaining years in a more glamorous style than most of the population. In fact, some of these villas were really quite amazing places. We have a car coming, I must pull over to the side here. Going nice and slowly. A key member of our local community, I recognise her. And on we go along here. So we have a villa, some burial mounds, and a road. And we're now getting quite close to being able to see the burial mounds. In the 19th century, nobody really knew what these mounds were. Nobody locally, obviously academics would have known, but farmers locally, landowners, farm workers wouldn't have known. And they were just seen as mounds in the landscape. And what actually happened here, we're going to cross the road and we're going to have a little look at the location of these mounds. There's only one that's now visible. There were four. And there in the distance along that hedge line, you may be able to make out a raised piece of ground with two sort of bumps and a dip in the middle. That is the remains of the biggest of the burial mounds. What happened was that in the early 1840s, a group of people who had allotments around here started digging soil out of one of these mounds to actually add to their allotment. And they dug down, and then they came across underground a brick, small brick chamber containing various Roman bits, including a glass funerary urn, which would have contained ashes of somebody, and a number of other bits and bobs, bowls, coins, oil lamps, those sort of things, things which were thought to be necessary for the afterlife. A few days later, news of this discovery came to the landowner at the time, who was a man here in Rougham called Philip Bennett. And he came and had a look and was intelligent enough to realise that what they had discovered was something really quite interesting. And he called for a famous scholar who lived in Cambridge called John Henslow, who we're going to go to the left here. Bolly wants to go to the right. We're just going to go and have a little look at this area, but it's very flooded, so we're not going to be able to get very far here. He called to John Henslow, who came out to have a look, and he realised that what they were looking at was a Roman burial site, and so he organised a series of excavations, which he then recorded in the Suffolk Archaeological magazine, the first volume of it. And it's the first organised archaeological dig in Suffolk. Happened here. But the first mound that he excavated, basically, there is really nothing of it left, sadly, except the contents found in this chamber, which then went to the local museum, a place called Moyses Hall in Bury. And these things are now on display as part of a little exhibit at West Stow Country Park, which is just west of Bury St Edmunds. But having excavated this site in 1843, Henslow then became very interested in the mound which we're looking at now, this big mound. And he organised an excavation of that in 1844, the following year. And they dug into the mound over a series of days. I mean, these days people would be appalled by the speed with which they did this, but they announced to the public that they were opening up the mound and that the public could come and have a look in a few days' time. And they had literally a few days in which to dig a hole into the mound. Extraordinary. And then on whatever the day was, Thursday or something, the ladies and gentlemen of the community showed up to have a look. So the ladies with hats and gentlemen with hats as well, I dare say, all came along to have a look inside. And what he had found was, in a way, quite extraordinary. It was a building buried inside a mound with a pitched roof. And inside this building was a plinth, concrete plinth, and there was a laid coffin with a body in it. And there are several things about this. We're just going to walk down the side here of the road so that we can see a little bit of the Eastlowhill burials. The big mound is beside me on the left behind the hedge. Normally there wouldn't be so much water here and it would be possible to walk through. At the moment it's not really practical. And so where this big mound is, you can see a hole, you may be able to see a hole in the side of the mound. That's where they dug in and found this coffin. And the significance of the coffin is that this would have been a Christian burial, because Christians were buried, pagans, non-Christians, were burnt. It was considered to be a pagan practice to burn the dead on a funerary pyre. And so as the Romans became Christian, they changed their burial practice from cremation, where the ashes then wound up in one of these glass jars, to burials, which are also called inhumations, where the body goes into a coffin, if you're rich enough. And I dare say part of this is that it would become a feature of life for the wealthy that they could be buried, they could afford to be buried in a coffin. But it's saying that this big mound here was buried by somebody who was a Christian, which means that it must be relatively late on in the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire went Christian in 313 AD, and so the likelihood is that this burial here is some point after that date. And what Henslow did was to take the skull and the coffin, and he sent them both to Cambridge. The skull was sent to the Anthropological Museum, and the coffin was sent to go into the Fitzwilliam Museum, which was currently at that stage being built. And whilst it was being built, things were being held in a temporary exhibition space, the name of which currently escapes me, but it was catalogued in there, and there's a reference to this lead coffin. Frustratingly, the coffin and the skull have now both disappeared. The coffin, I don't think, was a beautiful item. I think it would have been a simple form of lead bent around the corners, rather like you might make a cardboard box, bending the corners to create a rectangular shape with a lid. And somebody maybe stole it for the value of the lead, or maybe it simply just hasn't been found yet. We're still searching for it. And there was also hair found, orange hair. And 3 tufts of this hair were put into a frame, which is in the Anthropological Museum in Cambridge, and I've seen pictures of it. The natural assumption initially is that this is the hair off the person's head, but we think that the body was wrapped in some sort of a fur, wrapped in furs, and it could be the fur itself which one is actually seeing. I don't think anybody has analysed it sufficiently to know. But gives a sort of an insight into the life in the villa. The villa awaits excavation, and we are now walking along the Roman road which ran beside the 4 tumuli and runs now in a northerly direction, heading towards Ixworth. So we're now walking right down the middle of the Roman road. And Roman roads were constructed in a particular way. Everybody knows that they were very straight, and that is largely the case. In reality, they tend to go in zigzags. You have a straight section and then a bit of a bend and a correction to the direction, and then another straight section, and so they go on. But the way they constructed them, having decided on the route, was that they began by digging a ditch or trench on either side of the road. So here we have, to the left of the road, we have a ditch. And this ditch is probably pretty well exactly the position where the Roman ditch would have been. And what they did, the Romans, there would have been Roman soldiers doing this. They would dig the soil and the hard core and whatever they found in the ditch, and they would heap it up in the middle to form a raised area that would become the road. So you have a raised area in the middle with drainage on both sides, and then they would use whatever they could find locally to actually improve the surface. And round here we've found a number of pits, large pits, adjacent to the route of the road, some on the left, some on the right, which I think almost certainly were used as sand and gravel pits at that time to actually provide material to surface the road. And a road like this is never going to have been paved, But it may well have had stone of various descriptions. Around here the stone is limited to either flint or gravel. And so I dare say there would have been bits of each of these that would have covered this road. And this is, you have to think, this is the route that tens of thousands of Romans travelled up and down to get further north in East Anglia. We're walking down the middle of a 2,000-year-old road. Quite extraordinary, really. Also rather muddy, which is nothing to do with the Romans. It is to do with the fact that we did some hedging along here a little while ago, and it was already wet at that point, and that stirred up the surface, I'm afraid. And then combining that with all the rain, we've ended up with a muddy old route. But some patches are worse than others. We're going to be doing some pond restoration in a pond not so far from here in the near future, and that's going to be quite interesting. I don't think it's anywhere near the Roman road. Realistically, I don't think it's going to be a Roman dig as such. It's just a feature of life, even though that pond could conceivably have been the source of some material for either the mound, the burial mound. That soil had to have come from somewhere, or it could have been a source of material for the road, or a combination of the two. This is really quite muddy here. Bolly is wading through the mud. So as we walk north and speculate about the Romans and their burial practices and their road building practices and their farming, there's another feature of life which may have resulted in the location of the villa, which is that there is a lake now, Rougham Lake, which also features on one of our other walks, which is at the bottom of a slope leading down from the location of the villa. So the villa would have been on the high ground, with a south-facing slope leading down to an area with a number of springs, which now keep the lake filled all year round. But at the time, the Romans would have been interested in the springs for water supply, but also as potentially a sacred site. The Romans often had a temple associated with springs, and I should know the name of the goddess associated with that, but I'm afraid I can't remember it at the moment. But it's quite likely that the location of the villa would have been picked partly because of the location of the springs and the south-facing slope, which potentially could have grown wine, though it is clay soil and would not have been recommended for wine, really. I'm just trying to arrange the olive's lead slightly. Clay soil is not ideal for growing wine at all. So whether or not they really did that, I don't know, but they may just have liked the fact that it was a south-facing slope. And they would have very definitely liked the fact that there were springs at the bottom. The Romans also, of course, made bricks, and the villa was constructed of bricks, and some of these chambers, burial chambers, were constructed of bricks. And they made bricks and they made tiles, and these had to be sourced from clay. And so they tended to build their houses in places where there was clay around, so that they didn't have to transport the bricks and the tiles too far. And so clay soil is frequently associated with the Romans and their villa building practices. Now we have come actually to a point on the walk where, if I turn to the right, you can see a path leading across the field, more or less diagonally. That is actually the route of the Roman road. And so this is an example of what I was just saying, that there would be a straight section of road, and then it would adjust and go along a slightly different route, and then it would adjust again. At this point, that road goes down there. The bit of road that we've been walking along is called Whitebridge Lane these days, and there is no actual bridge along the current route. But if you follow that footpath down there, it goes down to cross a watercourse, very similar to the one we walked along at the beginning of this walk. And that would have needed a bridge. And so the fact that this ancient route has a name, White Bridge, suggests that its name predates the this existing section of the Green Lane system that we're in, and suggests that the name associates to the route that would have gone off to the right there, and that would have then crossed the watercourse with a little bridge, which may possibly have been white in some way. Maybe it was made of Roman concrete, which would have looked fairly white. And I do think that this is an indication that it genuinely was a Roman road along here. In fact, you can see on Google Earth pictures further north on the estate, along the route of the road as it carries on further north, you can actually see in the crop marks the line of the road, with the two ditches, one on either side, and the road going through the middle. Very, very distinctive, very, very clear indication of the route of the road. However, we have now pulled away from the Roman road, because the last section of our walk is going to be following along the Green Lane system, which is frankly a much more aesthetic experience, much more interesting experience, environmentally more interesting too. And so here we are, coming to the edge of this very, very muddy field and approaching Mouse Lane, which lies ahead of us. Mouse Lane runs left, right across our front, and we're going to be turning left here into this very, very lovely Green Lane. And we walk along here for a little while before we take a right turn. Mouse Lane features on several of these walks because it is so special. I don't think anybody can get too much of this. So what we're walking along here is no longer a Roman road, but an ancient route that would probably have linked up with was bound to have linked up with the Roman road. And so you can see how the road systems gradually develop. You get a sort of starter, which is in this case the Roman road, and then people think, oh well, if I went off from here to there, that could make a nice link. And that's effectively what we've got here. And ahead of us, coming up now on our right front, is the turn which we're going to be taking to head further north as we're making our way slowly back towards the Blackthorpe Barn. So we swing round, say goodbye to this bit of the Roman road, and swing around slowly onto the new section. When I say new, I don't mean that it's actually newer, but it's a new route for this walk. You can see the left-hand side hedge has been cut quite recently. On the right it's been left, but it was cut at some point. You have to cut these hedges. If you don't, they will eventually just grow into each other and the whole route will be completely impassable. And you'll find along here that there is actually a very narrow section which we do have to work on to keep it open. And this is an indication of the sort of thing that could easily happen if you just abandoned these things. But a lot of people like walking along here, and I don't think there's any real risk of this ever being blocked up. We have some holly growing in what would have been virtually the centre of the green lane. Great big holly tree, and in fact several. Holly is something nobody will cut, and this is probably part of what's happened, that at some point some holly berries got buried there and a new holly was germinated, and nobody would remove it or touch it because it's bad luck to actually do that. So the thing has just grown. And here we have another one, much the same, blocking the route. Nearly, not quite. You can manage to get through. On the left here, we have the deep bank down to the field. To all intents and purposes, it does look rather like the Roman road, doesn't it? But this actually isn't. Which shows that building practices probably remained very similar after Roman times, though they would have been much less organised and much more locally based. There's a bank on the right here where the hedge grows. And there are various crab apples and things which grow along here, which overhang the route. I think this is a crab apple here, which in the autumn make this a very colourful route to walk. The route does a bit of a dog's leg here, as we go slightly left and then slightly right. More holly growing here in the hedge line. Much smaller, much younger plants. And this route goes on as we approach the Mouse Lane housing estate, the modern housing estate, which is named after this old lane, which you may be familiar with from watching other walks. You can hear the wind blowing in the trees, creating quite an atmosphere, I think. And at this point the landscape opens up a bit. The hedge on the left has disappeared as we see a small field emerging. Now, I must try not to slip down this slope because it's quite muddy. Oh, that very nearly went over then. Not quite. That would have been quite interesting. On we go. It's a warning to everybody that these things are very slippery here, and you do have to take care. Wellington boots are often not the best grip for walking, even though they're good for waterproof things. So do take rather more care than I did. I just got rather lucky there. Each time I walk along here, I think how nice it would be to plant a bit of a hedge along here on the left. And I must try to remember to make a note of it as a plan for a future year. And we now approach the end of the Mouse Lane footpath, and the public road appears ahead of us. This is also called Mouse Lane, with Keddington Close on the other side of the road. That's the sign you can see there, it says Keddington Close. So Mouse Lane, just to prove it, is on this side here. Somebody coming along with a wheelbarrow. Oh, they're very kind of them, they're getting off the pavement. They really didn't need to do that. And here comes a car. Morning. Didn't have to do that, really. Didn't have to cross the road for me, but that was very kind of you. Thank you. Oh, you're going that way. That's fine. Jolly good. Absolutely. Yes, it is. It's lovely. So we head on this last section of the public road version of Mouse Lane, heading up to the Blackthorpe Road ahead of us, which is quite busy, and you do need to treat that road with some considerable care. People do go along it. There's a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit, but people do go along at all of 30 miles an hour, and some of them faster. So, dogs on short leads, hang on to children, be careful as you go across. It only takes a moment to cross the road, and then we're back on the safer ground on the other side. Last 50 metres before the road here. And it won't be long before we're back at the Blackthorpe Barn. I can hear a car coming. There we go. And now we cross the road with care. And then we're on the safer ground again. And shortly now we'll be reaching the Blackthorpe Barn Avenue, and only in a minute or two we'll actually be back at the barn, and our walk will be coming to a close. Here's some more blackthorn in its latter stages, with its leaves, distinctive blackthorn leaves, which are an oval shape, as you can see here, I hope. And during most of the year, that's what you look at with blackthorn. The avenue appearing in front of us, and we take the right fork here as we head down back towards the barn. In this last section we'll be just going east again very briefly. So there's the avenue. And on we go. There's a holly tree growing out of the side of an oak tree there. We're thinking about holly trees today. You suddenly start spotting them all over the place. The snowdrops are disappearing now. We can see the leaves conspicuously in clumps if you know where to look, but the flowers are more or less gone. It's actually a good moment to transplant snowdrops if you're ever interested in doing that sort of thing, and they're much more successful transplanted like that. It's called transplanting them in the green whilst they've got leaves, than it is to just get some bulbs, which tend to be really rather unsuccessful as a system of spreading the bulbs around. So plant them in the green. The same applies to aconites. That's a bit of garden information for you there. Right, we are almost back at the Blackthorpe barn. Here's one of the wonderful old lime trees. And we pan round to the right to see the barn ahead of us, beginning to come into view, and the car park with quite a few visitors who are currently in Roots Cafe. Little bit of advertising. Roots Cafe is open every day from 9:30 to 4 and offers all sorts of lovely tea, cake, food, drinks. It's lovely and warm. There are toilets, lots of reasons to pop in there at the end of your walk. There's a place to clean your boots, and there's dog bowls. It's very, very dog friendly in there. Okay, well, here we are. This is the end of the Blackthorpe barn building, and so I'm saying goodbye to you for today, and I hope to see you again on another walk. Thank you very much. Bye bye.